am Beto, and this is Modern Immigrant. Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of Modern Immigrant. As always, I'm very happy, I'm excited, and I feel so grateful with the opportunity to bring you a new immigration story. And grateful for all of you that are listening, that are watching, that are subscribing, and supporting this podcast however you can. Today, we're going to be talking about finances, and it's sort of like a one-on-one finances for immigrants. I had the amazing opportunity to talk to Tess. She's a financial advisor, and she's also an immigrant. Tess moved to the US when she was a teenager after graduating from high school in Bulgaria. Tess grew up in a home where talking about money was something really natural, and it was no taboo. This definitely inspired Tess to later in life work as a financial advisor and support others in managing their money, in managing their finances, and in building wealth. What I love the most about this episode is that Tess is going to give us really easy steps that we can all start to take in order to build our wealth, in order to organize our finances. We discuss how we can start to build our emergency fund. We talk about how credit cards work in the US and how is that so different from, for example, my country where I grew up or her own case as an immigrant. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. You're going to learn so much from Tess' immigration journey and also from Tess' financial advising career. Also, down below in the description of this video or this episode, if you're listening, you're going to find Tess's website so you can go and connect with her. She offers consultations and she also offers support for anyone that wants to start managing their finances and talking about money. Thank you so much one more time for being here. And remember to share this episode if you learned something, if you found it helpful. This is an amazing way in supporting these immigrant voices and supporting these immigrant stories. This is sharing is caring. So let's go and share it and grow this community of modern immigrants that are decided to share their story and that want to support one another. So thank you one more time for being here and enjoy this episode. I'm really excited to be here for another episode of Modern Immigrant, and Tess is with us today. We're going to talk about a very interesting topic that I know a lot of the listeners enjoy and ask and want to know more of. So we're happy to have a specialist with us today.
So excited to be here.
Yes, it's really exciting, and I really feel really grateful and excited when you email me because talking about money can be pretty challenging sometimes for us immigrants, and it's something that we need help with. And why don't we start by learning a little bit from you, your background, and what's your story of immigration or relationship with immigration?
Sure. So here's my story. I grew up in Bulgaria, which is in Eastern Europe. And interesting enough, I think one of the reasons why I eventually became a financial advisor is because money was not a taboo topic back home. And so growing up, it was something that my parents openly discussed at the dinner table with us kids being around. So it was nothing that I ever feared or had any sort of shame or any of those negative feelings, which I find a lot of people do have towards money. Yeah. It was just a very normal thing to talk about. So I never shied away from money growing up. In fact, I even worked for my grandparents because they had a little convenience store.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, I was an 8-year-old working at the store giving change to people. So I was very familiar with numbers and working with money from a very young age.
Yes.
And then I want to say, after living in Bulgaria, I actually immigrated to Botswana in Africa.
Okay.
So my family moved us there when I was 11 years old. And so I've lived in a few different places. And then when I was 16 and I graduated high school, I tell everyone that my parents shipped me off to America for the American dream.
Yes.
But, it was a big achievement for them because they
Mm.
you know, a lot of us immigrants, you know, the goal is to get your kids educated in America and give them a better future, right? That's what we all come here for. So I came when I was 16 years old and I studied finance. And that's when I learned everything about the financial system and how things work in America, which is totally different from how things work in Africa or how things work in Bulgaria. And, you know, I learned about compound interest and investing and how all of that works. And I thought this is so cool. You can, you
Yes.
know, you can start with little dollar amounts, and if you invest over a long period of time, you can actually be wealthy one day. And, you know, the idea of that to me felt so empowering because I don't come from a rich family. So the idea that I could be wealthy one day is amazing to me.
Right. And I think that's what's a lot of us immigrants when we come to the US, or I'm sure to other countries as well, we feel like we're not in a privileged position. Like we feel like we're a little like behind because
Sure.
people had already, been building their wealth in this country. And for immigrants, sometimes we have to like, okay, maybe we have to sell a lot of our stuff to move. Maybe we have to invest. And it's like, oh, how do I, like, what do I do in this new country? But there's a ton of things I want to ask you. But the first one is,
Sure.
how was it for you to move to the US as a teenager that was first living in Bulgaria, then living in Africa? Like, how was that impact? Because I'm sure it was very different, as you were saying.
Yeah. You know, I think all of us who immigrate here have some similar experiences and some slightly different, right? Depending on where we come from. But I think overall, there's definitely a culture shock because, you know, whatever you're used to is different than what you encounter here. I came to the States. The first place I landed was in Minot, North Dakota.
I haven't heard about it.
Yeah, it's not a very diverse community, okay, to say the least. And so I very much felt like an outsider. There weren't very many people who looked like me or talked like me. You know, my accent was definitely something that everyone made a point to mention.
Wow.
And not in a good way. So I definitely felt like an outsider, and it definitely took some time to adapt to my new environment and make friends and, you know, feel like I belong.
Yes, definitely. And that's a whole process, right? Like just
Yes.
finding your space, and it's like for what you're sharing, like it seemed like you were able to make this country your home and stay, but that takes time. And
It takes time.
I like for listeners to hear your story and hear how sometimes it really doesn't matter from where you're coming from. I feel like
Mhm.
all immigrants face different challenges depending
Yes.
on where you're at. And I'm sure a lot of us come with a lot of benefits when we enter the country, but it can still
Mhm.
be hard no matter what's the
Absolutely.
position. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, all good things take time, right? So whether it's investing or getting used to the new environment, it just, you have to be patient and you have to give yourself grace.
Exactly, totally. That patience.
Yes.
And when you started, so you start feeling like this hope with the topic of financial building financial wealth and people investing. How do you think your immigration impacted your decision to go to that route? Like how was for you as an immigrant in another country dealing with your finances?
So I will tell you, I was so young at the time when
Mm.
I first started college. I had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up. The only reason I went into finance is because one of our family friends was in banking and she was a female and she said that it was a great career, right?
Yes.
So 16-year-old me thought, okay, well, you know, there's this one person who thinks finance is a great field, so let's try it out.
I love it. That's how we all, I think, start our first kind of
Yeah, I think
career.
stumble into, you know, a
Yes.
um, a degree program. So, I ended up going into finance, and it's kind of funny. So I remember, the first 2 years we all do our gen eds, right? The general
Just, oh,
education
yes.
classes. And then, eventually I started taking some business classes. And the business building was pretty fairly split between women and men.
Mm.
But then as soon as everybody kind of picked their major and I started going to my finance classes, I just remember being one of a handful of girls just surrounded by men.
Oh, oh no.
Yeah.
Yes.
So interesting enough, to this day, finance is very much male dominated.
Mm.
So, I feel very lucky to have found this profession, because I think women are so good in financial services, because it's really part therapy, part coaching, more
Yes.
listening than talking. So, I just feel super lucky to have found this after, spending 10 years well, 7, I guess around 9 years in the corporate finance environment, and then becoming a financial advisor.
And I'm sure that being in that world has to be like another level too. Like, I'm sure you experience a lot of things, like being a woman, being one of the only ones, being an immigrant, like
Yes.
the corporate. I don't know how the corporate America looks like, because I have always been in fields that are very like, social work and human services. So you find more, vulnerability and, and
Yeah,
like open
absolutely.
spaces to like open more communication. But I'm sure it was very different in your case.
Yes. So being in corporate finance, being a female, and then being an immigrant on top of that, I mean, more times than not, I just felt like I did not belong there.
Right.
Everybody would make references to movies they watched growing up in the US, and I'll be like, I don't know what movie you're talking about, because I grew up in, a totally different world.
Yeah, watching different things. Yes. And that's so important, because that's how you connect. Like in the US, I feel like there's a lot of people give a lot of importance to those connections and networking
Yes.
and building trust. So if they don't feel like they know you, then they
Yes.
can trust you,
Right.
but you have a
Yes.
different set of cultural backgrounds.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. There were just more differences than than
Right.
reality. So, it's hard, because, you either have to change and become more like the people around you, or you have to, remove yourself from that environment and find a place where you can be who you are and be accepted for that uniqueness.
I love that you're putting it that way. And I'm guessing you chose the second option.
Yes,
How did you do? Yeah.
it took me a while to figure out,
Mm.
what my options were, but I kind of came at that crossroads after 9 years in corporate finance, where I realized that either I had to change and adapt to kind of fit into the mold in order to progress, right? Because for me, progression is super important. I always want to be, doing more and
Yeah.
achieving more, and so it came to that point where I decided that it was better to just, start my own business and do something different than try to fit in and not be true to myself.
Yeah. I love that you're talking about this, because you're talking about how you had to do that in your professional
Mhm.
life and at a professional level. And I think that we can apply that to so many other instances in our immigration, right? Because same
Yeah,
happens with like trying to adapt to the country, trying to learn the finances, trying to learn the culture. And I think a lot of the times immigrants are forcing themselves to adapt, right?
sure. Yeah.
Until I feel like we all hopefully get to this realization where we say what you're saying, like,
Mhm.
I need to create something on my own. And that doesn't mean
Yeah,
necessarily leaving the country or leaving behind. Like, we continue to carry the things we learn, but we need
sure.
to make like our own spaces where we can maybe practice some of our traditions, speak our language, but
Yes.
also, within the country, right? Like it's complex, but yeah,
Yeah, it is complex, but even just finding your community where you feel more at home, right? Uh, I mean, I lived in Minot, North Dakota, where there was no diversity whatsoever. And then I moved to Chicago, where there is so much diversity. There's Bulgarian community, there's Hispanic, there's just about any community you can think of. There's pockets. And I mean, just, making that change in my life, I felt so much better because, I fit in way better, in Chicago than I did in Minot, North Dakota. I felt more at home, like I could be more
definitely.
of myself.
Yeah, even if it's connecting with others because they also feel different, right? Like maybe we don't come from the same countries, but we're all trying to find those spaces, right?
Yes, exactly.
And I feel like I want to ask you, I have like a few questions I wrote down when we connected, and I want to ask you, what have you learned about building wealth? Like what's something that you feel like, why does somebody needs to learn how to do this? Like if some of our listeners are checking out this episode, they feel intrigued,
Sure.
why building wealth? Why doing this?
Yeah. So I think we all come to America to have a better life, right? Whether it's a better life for us, better life for, our parents and
Yes.
our future children, right?
Mhm.
And so I think it's an amazing opportunity to be here because I always remember, how many of my friends would love to be here and love to have this opportunity, right?
Totally.
There's so many people. And so I think, with with great power comes great responsibility, literally from Spider-Man, because we've been watching Spider-Man a lot with my 7-year-old.
I love it. You gotta quote
But
that. Yeah.
yeah, but I think, the fact that we're here is such an amazing opportunity because I still think America is one of the only places on this planet where you can create the life that you want, the life that you envision for yourself. And with that comes building wealth because, at the end of the day, money is it might not buy you happiness, but it's certainly a necessity in life, right? To pay for the people that you care about, to have health insurance, to buy healthy food for your family, to have shelter over our head. So it's definitely, a necessity in life. And it can give you freedom
Yes.
to do the things you want and to spend time with the people you care about and to do bigger things in life and, to give back, help charities, right? There's so much good that comes from having more money and building wealth.
Totally, totally. And I feel like a lot of the times when I hear this concept, I think about this community, the immigrant community, and how much survival we have to do at the beginning of our journeys, or some people even for way longer, not just the beginning, right? Like a lot of stories of people that come to this country just with a few dollars, with nothing, start fresh, kind of like trying to seek that American dream that for some people it happened, for other people, they can achieve it. I don't even know how. I think that American dream can mean different things for everyone.
Absolutely.
But I love like the concept of, okay, how can someone that's feeling like they need to work 3 and 4 jobs
Hmm.
be having, how can they focus on saying, okay, I need to start thinking about my future because I don't
Hmm.
want to be working 4 jobs, right? Like how do you do that
Yeah.
transition when you're in a moment? Because to me, I feel like having a privileged kind of mindset, I feel like, oh yeah, you build wealth when you're already doing good.
Sure,
You know what I
sure.
mean? Like, oh,
Yes.
that's easy. I can save
Yeah,
money. The times in my life have been doing well, I have some backup.
of
But
course.
what can we tell those immigrants that might be listening that right now they feel like this is not for me? Like I don't see
Mhm.
it, right?
Yeah,
Where can they start in this
totally.
journey?
So listen, I totally understand that struggle because when I first came to the States, I was a college student. Okay. So first of all, the first few years, I couldn't even work
I
legally,
know.
right?
Yes.
Yes, a lot of us have gone through that.
Yeah.
And then eventually I was able to work, but I don't know if you've gone through the H-1B visa process and that struggle,
I did
right?
not that one, but I did like the OPT, like the
Okay.
practicum
Yep.
after college.
Sure.
And on top of the experience you're saying of college and not being able to work, we also have to
Yeah,
pay like double tuition.
absolutely. Exactly.
So yeah, international students have to pay a lot of money.
Right, right, to study here, which is why all my professors always said, wow, why are all the international students such better students?
Yes.
It's costing us an arm and a leg to be here. Like, we understand that it's such a privilege to be here. We don't
Mhm.
take it lightly.
And we can be taking like more and more classes. Like if we don't pass, we're
Right,
out and we lose our visa. So it's like it really
absolutely.
depends on,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, the struggle is very real.
totally.
So I think, the biggest thing is we have to recognize that there is going to be certain periods of our life where it's about like survival and the basics. And then as we kind of progress in the society, that's when we can really start thinking about building wealth, right?
Good. Okay.
So, I mean, in our case, back to when we were college students and dealing with those visas. I mean, it was a challenge just to survive, right? I don't know about you, but I was just worried about being kicked out of the country and, oh my God, am I going to be here tomorrow?
Totally. I
Right?
wasn't, yeah, exactly. And I think that's why I want to ask about that because it's like, wow, maybe I could have been building wealth back there, but I didn't have any money.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think, we have to recognize that again, it's a process and it takes time. And if you're at the point of just survival, like you just have to survive, right?
Yeah.
And it's just building blocks, right? So you just keep leveling up, you keep working on your skills. And then I feel like once I got my green card, right? And I realized that, wow, I'm going to be able to stay in this country long term.
Right.
That's when I got really serious about building wealth, right? That's
Okay.
when I really started thinking about the future and, realizing that I really need to start saving and investing because my future is going to be here, right? And in America, nobody takes care of you, right? This is not back home where you take care of your parents when they get older. Um, you know,
True.
so
Yeah.
I recognize that, if I'm gonna stay here long term, I have to be in control of my future and I have to start saving and investing for my future.
Yes, that's so huge. What you're saying, it's like the responsibilities really shift. And it's interesting that you talk about understanding that this is a process and it's not, if this doesn't sound like something you can do right now, that's okay.
That's
You
okay.
have to wait and also wait until you see that a lot of immigrants know that they're going to go back or they know that they're going to go somewhere else. Like I know a lot of people that are in the US and they don't want to stay here. They don't see a life here. So
Sure.
that's going to impact a lot of your desire to build something for the future or not.
Yes, yes, absolutely. But I think, for me personally, once I got that green card and I got married, my thought process changed because, my life is going to be here.
Exactly. And I
So,
want to have a family and I want those thoughts.
exactly. Exactly. So that's when I really got serious about building wealth and learning everything I needed to learn about personal finances.
And you already had like the background with the professional like career that you had, but can you
Yes.
give us like one thing that a person can start doing today if they're feeling like they can and they're more serious in their desire to build wealth and maybe they don't know about finances like you do? What's a good advice? Like, do you think they need to connect with a financial advisor? Do you think they need to do something a little higher level or they can start from something small?
Sure. So I think the first step is really just to get educated on the basics. So the basics of personal finance, and the internet makes that so easy, right?
True.
And so accessible. I also love books, printed books. So I'm a
Me
big
too.
fan of just going to the library to pick up some personal finance books and just, understand the basics, such as, how credit cards work, right? And kind of get that foundation in place is what I like to think of it. So the foundation is making sure you have an emergency savings, right? 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses in cash, just in case something happens, you lose your job, your, roof blows over, your HVAC system stops working, right? I mean, things happen. So that's one of the key pieces for everyone to work on is get your emergency savings in place.
Really
Use credit cards responsibly. That's huge, right?
Oh my goodness. I feel like I needed a class on how to use credit cards before
Yes.
I moved to this country. And I was talking to a friend the other day about it. And I want to talk about this now that you're talking about it. I don't know why I'm saying that word so much, but we were like giving a credit card and I was an au pair. I wasn't even in my I was an au pair making little money in the program and I applied for it and they gave it to me immediately. And then I had like $500, I think was the limit, but I was making no money. And I put it on my annual income. I remember putting less than what I was actually making because I didn't want them to think I was making more money. And I was like, they're not going to give it to me. And then it was so easy, differently from my country. And you were saying the same, how things where you lived for different as well. I was like, okay, now what do I do with this? How do we use credit cards in the US? And I know this can be a more longer episode, but how can, yeah.
So here's the one thing that we always have to remember about credit cards. The only time you should put something on a credit card is if you have the money in your bank account to pay for it in full at the end of that month, okay?
Okay.
Because what happens is
Yes.
people buy things on credit cards when they don't have the money for it. And what they don't realize is that that credit card company is out to make money. They're in the business of making money and they charge a really high interest rate for the privilege of you buying something that you can't afford.
And I grew up, so in my culture, at least what I remember was that you had credit cards for emergencies.
Yeah.
Which, of course, if I have an emergency and I need to use my credit, if I'm traveling or whatever, I will use it.
Yes.
But an emergency can turn into, well, I don't have enough money to do the groceries, so let me buy groceries. Exactly. Well, this might not be an emergency, but I need a new pair of shoes because I'm going to this thing. Right. And so that line becomes really thin because you really need that stuff and you don't have the money to pay for it.
Exactly.
And then you're in a really bad spot.
Yes. Because, a lot of the credit cards have an APR that's close to 30%, right? And so what happens is if you charge something on the credit card and you don't pay it off in full, and if you're just making those minimum payments that are, not making a difference to that credit card statement, that purchase price ends up doubling over approximately 2.5 years. So, it's like a snowball effect. It just keeps growing and growing. The balance just keeps growing. So the thing that, that should have cost you $500 ends up costing you double or more if you just, completely forget about the credit card bill and just keep charging things on it.
And it's really difficult that in any case, we didn't have the money for those $5,000. It's almost impossible that in a few months we're gonna have double of that. You know what I mean? Like if we didn't have it at the moment,
exactly,
it's really rare that's gonna happen. That now suddenly I have 10K that I can put on my credit card. Like I feel like just learning about. I love that was, I think, your second point besides building the emergency fund. Learning about credit cards and understanding that I'm 100% sure that the credit card system is going to be different from what you were used to in your home country for the most part.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I didn't even have credit cards back home, so there was no concept of credit cards at all.
Wow. And that happens in a lot of Latin American countries. Like people don't even have them. Yeah.
Right, right. Which is kind of a saving grace because,
Yes.
because you're forced to save for things that you want to purchase, right? You can't
Yeah.
just put it on your credit card and forget about it.
And you're forced to have that emergency money as
Yes,
well.
yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
So that's good.
So that is super important. And then the next step really is to make sure that you have all the necessary insurances in place. So, I always think about health insurance, so important in America because so many people get medical bills and then end up having to file for bankruptcy because nobody can pay for that stuff out of pocket. I mean, it's thousands of dollars if you have to go to the hospital, right? And then life insurance is another one because, if you have financial dependence, I'm thinking especially minor children who rely on your income, right? And something happens to you or your spouse, whoever is working and providing for the family financially, you have to make sure that the dependents are protected,
Right. Okay.
right? Along with, of course, house insurance, auto insurance, and disability insurance. Those are just some basic things that I think people just don't think about sometimes, but you gotta make sure you have those protections in place just in case.
Yeah. And you think that finding those protections, do you think is easy? Is there easy access to find those? I feel like the insurance world can be a little complex sometimes, especially if you're not, this is not your country and like maybe the language barrier. Like, are there any ways that you feel like it's easier to seek information around insurances?
Absolutely. So if you're working for a company, usually they have employee benefits. So that's typically the first thing I go to. It's let's figure out what you have through work, right?
Mm.
And then if there's any gaps in coverage, then we start looking at outside insurance outside of work. So, additional life insurance, potentially additional disability insurance, things like that. And I'll say there's so many great insurance agents that, you should be able to find someone, even if, you want someone to speak your own home language.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like going to the doctor on your home language and also like talking about money stuff, right? Like you want to be able to feel comfortable.
Totally. Yes, yes, that is key.
Amazing. So Tess, I mean, these are just amazing tips and just advices, especially coming from a person that had to navigate this herself and learn
Yes.
in the process. I think like I value that so much more than just coming from someone that is just a specialist but doesn't have the lived experience.
Yeah.
What are you currently working on? How do you help people in this um world, and how can listeners maybe connect with you if that's a possibility?
Yeah, absolutely. So interesting enough, a lot of a lot of my clients are very similar to me. So a lot of them are either first generation immigrants or they were born here, so they've lived here all their life, but their parents are from, a different country.
Yes.
Um, and so I typically have that commonality. But usually I start with a conversation. So if anybody wants to reach out, if they have questions about, credit cards or how to build wealth in America, I am happy to have that conversation. I'll say my website is truewealthy.com. And that's usually the best way to reach out. I actually have my calendar right on my website, so it's super easy to find time.
And people
for
can
us.
book some time with you.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
I'm gonna put all that information on the link of this episode, the description, so people can go check out those services. And before we say goodbye, there's something that you said that you're working with a lot of first gen or second generation that their parents weren't born here, and that just made me think about this topic of sometimes as immigrants, second generation, first generation, we need to like take care of our parents and we
Yes.
become like their retirement fund. And I
Yes.
had an episode on that in the podcast, and it was amazing how much feedback I got, because I feel like a lot of us immigrants, when they heard that was the thing, they were like, yes, I am my parents' retirement fund, because they didn't have the
Yes.
opportunity to build that wealth.
Right.
So wow, that like adds on another layer of
Yes.
like, maybe we need to even consider that as a,
Mhm.
yeah, have you heard, like, have that been an experience for you, or have you heard about this struggle?
Yes, it is a struggle. I mean, even in my own family, my parents retired a few years ago. And so me and my sister have literally had those discussions about, well, who's going to take care of them, when they're older? What if they need assistance, literally, with, when people get older and they can't do they call it the activities of daily living,
Living,
such as
yes.
walking, bathing, cooking. I mean, all those things that we take for granted when we're healthy. But we know that as we age, unfortunately, we might need help. And so, those are definitely things that we have to navigate. And I will say the answer is different for every family, right?
Right.
Because there is some immigrants who come here and they just don't get to that point where they can build wealth for themselves, but they set their kids up very well, and then eventually they end up retiring back in their home country because the cost of living is much cheaper,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that is one solution that I have seen for certain families,
Exactly.
where
Mm-hmm.
it can make sense. For other families, the parents move in with one of their kids. So it's very personal. It's case by case, because I mean, let's be real, not everyone's willing to have their parents move into their house, and not
And
everyone's able to support them financially.
that is, yeah, like that's also like a conversation. Like there's a lot of people that would say that's not on me, right? Like, and that's very personal, as you're saying,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you don't know the family dynamics,
Mhm.
what happened there. But I think it's interesting that, if someone is worried about their finances, or wants to explore a little bit more this topic, just talking to someone like you can be really helpful, because you can or you can explore how their finances are, and if it's even a possibility or not, because sometimes we need someone to review it and say, you might be better off focusing on another thing.
Right, right. I think the biggest thing is that culturally, I get it, because, culturally, that's how we were raised, that you take care of your parents when they get old. That's just what you do.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, which I wouldn't say is the norm in America.
Exactly. And then when you're in another country, that's so true. You're like, well, things are not set up to be like that here, because
Right.
people have different kind of protections here. I feel like if they're from here, and if they
Yes.
age here. So it is interesting, but I think it's really important for people to kind of like give themselves that opportunity to learn more about the topic, because I feel like the worst we can do is say, oh, I'm not good with that, finances are not my thing.
Right.
It's all of our thing. Like, we should all talk about
Absolutely.
this. So I'm
Exactly.
really grateful that you came to Modern Immigrant to explore this topic. And I don't know if there's one last thing that you want to leave us with, before we say goodbye. I think we have like a long list of amazing recommendations from you.
Sure. Well, I guess if there was one takeaway, it would be that, as immigrants, I think we can all agree that we work super hard to be here. And I just want to say that you deserve to be wealthy. Okay. It's not something that's for everyone else but you. No, it's absolutely attainable, and it's just one step at a time.
I love it. Thank you so much for leaving us that message. I think we forget about it in the process and in the journey of survival. We forget that we have that right, and that there's nothing wrong with that.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Tess. This has been so amazing. And people, please go check out the link so they can connect with you. This has been a real honor.
Likewise, I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you again.
Yeah, and thank you everybody for listening.